Hello all, this is NaveenPrabhu. Today we are going to look at the game between Magnus, Carlsen and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. I hope you all enjoyed the last video, which is a game between Polugaevsky and Mikhail. The interesting part about the game is sacrifice of the bishop. That too against a player like Mikhail is something about that game. So I just posted a video yesterday. I hope you all enjoy that video. If you can miss that video, I will put a link in the description box. You can watch it on yourself. Let's go into the game. That is, this game actually featured in the yesterday's round 9 of Tata Steel 2022 Masters League. The game starts with the move. They goes for the queen pawn opening here, and he develops his knight to f6, and Magnus goes for f3, knight to f3, and Mamedyarov pushes his pawn to d5, claims some space in the center. That is, they are going for the queen's gambit here. Here Magnus plays c4, and Mamedyarov defends his d5 pawn with the move e6. And here again Magnus goes for a g3 push. That is one more catalan in this game, in this tournament. Before we are going to look at the game, I want to tell you that as per the round 8 standings, they both are on 5.5 points each. That is, they are the only two to have 5.5 each. Let's go into the game. The idea of pushing the pawn to g3 is to put his bishop here and castle here. That is, as you know that you already seen a game between Carlsen and Anish Giri, that this bishop actually looking at this diagonal very well, and he also sacrificed his rook as an exchange sacrifice, and he wins the game against Anish Giri. That's what we have actually seen a game in Catalan. That's amazing. If you missed that video, I am also giving a link in the description box. You can go through it. Here, Mamedyarov captures the pawn here, and Magnus puts his bishop to g2 here. Here, Mamedyarov gives this check, and Magnus blocks it with this bishop. And here, he supports the bishop with the move a5, and we can't simply just capture the bishop, and after the pawn captures, we cannot say that the pawn is weak here, because it is not the case here. Because after the pawn capture, these two pawns are really strong in this situation. We have to waste some moves to capture these pawns by playing this knight and goes for the pawn. Like, I will show you a sample line. After the knight comes here, we will just castle and concentrate on development. But here, white have to waste some moves to capture this pawn, because this is so strong. If we leave this pawn, this can be something hard to defend in this situation. So we need to capture this pawn. So Magnus knows that he didn't go for this, and here a popular choice is to play our queen to c2 or c1, but Magnus didn't choose that. If he goes for something like c1, the game may continue like this. This diagonal is so strong for the bishop, because after c1, the c4 pawn hangs. You have to defend with this move b5, and as you see, the bishop is very strong in this diagonal, because this diagonal is open. After we move the knight, it directly attacks the rook here. So it is not that great in the situation, because after b5 we can just castle and goes for a safety, and after the bishop captures here, we captures back. And note that he can't just put his bishop here in this line, because he can't counter our bishop by putting the bishop on b7, because we have an interesting move to play on this situation. I'll give you a few seconds. You can try it on yourself. I hope you guys found this move, that is queen to g5. As you see that it's creating so much pressure here. Actually, the queen is attacking the pawn on g7, and it also attacking the pawn on b5. It is not possible to defend both of the pawns. You have to give up some pawn in the situation, and this is very useful for us. Gives some advantage for white, but you can't put this bishop now, you have to first defend this diagonal. Also blocks this diagonal of the bishop. Then there is nothing to worry about queen to g5 in this line, because here only this pawn hangs. This is well defended by the c6 pawn. We can just castle and continue the game here. It's a advantage for black in the situation. So knowing that, Magnus just goes for a castle in the situation. He don't want to play something like queen to c1 and continue the position. So he castles here. Mamedyarov does the same here. Now he pushes the pawn to e3, and as of now only 12 games have been played in this variation. This game is going to be in a rare one, because here Mamedyarov goes for rook to a6. This position has been reached only once earlier. In that game, queen to a4 has been played, but here Magnus plays the move queen to c2 here. That is, goes for queen to c2 and attacks the c4 pawn. Here he blocks with he supports it with the move pawn to b5. Here you don't have to worry about this diagonal here, because there is no rook on the a8 square. Now he just undermining the b5 pawn, so that if the pawn captures here, we can just capture the c4 pawn. So he just defended the b5 pawn here. It also actually blocks the rook's way of coming to the center. And also note that the bishop and the rook eyeing at the a5 square, which may come into a useful position after the bishop and the pawn gets traded off in the situation. We have to look at that. But actually Mamedyarov has been considering this plan, because he's asking Magnus to capture the pawn on ace5. As you see in the position, here Magnus goes for knight to c3, and here Mamedyarov puts his rook to b6, and he actually frees up the a5 square, which may be a problem in the game. Here Magnus starts pushing the e pawn to attack the knight here. Here Mamedyarov just goes back with his bishop to e7, and here Magnus attacks. Maybe it's something preparation on the spot for Mamedyarov, because he is just giving up this pawn. Now he comes to knight to d5. After we capture this pawn, he captures back. But a good move in the situation is to block with this knight, because after we capture, the knight will capture back. After this captures, the knight will captures back, and we are just looking at this square, which is not that good. A good move actually to place the knight on b4, cutting this diagonal here. But Mamedyarov has something in his mind. He didn't go for that. He captured the pawn here, and after the knight captures here, and he captures back with this pawn, and he is inviting bishop to capture the a5 pawn here, and it actually loses the exchange here, because the rook and the queen are on the same line. Magnus just captures and accepts the challenge here. Mamedyarov attacks the bishop with his knight to c6. Here Mamedyarov loses the exchange. The queen captures back, and Magnus puts his rook to a8 and asking Mamedyarov, if the bishop moves, he will just trade the pair of rooks, and Magnus is the only one to have the rooks in the situation. It is not at all good, because as a material down, we have to have some pieces in the board. We don't want to trade pieces in the situation. Actually, this exchange sacrifice can be played well. With accurate play, we can manage to play, because of the two pawns in the situation, that is the c and b pawn. Soon we can able to create some passer in the situation. Whether the c pawn or the b pawn, there will be a passer in the situation. But that requires a very accurate play in the situation. We don't know when Mamedyarov thought of sacrificing the exchange in the situation. Maybe he prepared well, or maybe on the spot preparation. Because I think he may be prepared on the spot in this variation, because as you note the time here, he has only 52 minutes on the clock here. So maybe you have prepared the position on the spot. Don't know what happened in the game. Here Magnus goes for rook to a8, and if the bishop moves he will just trade off. So you don't want to trade pieces. So Mamedyarov plays the move h6. Actually in the position it's working to play the move bishop to e6. To you want to give up the rook here because after the rook capture we can just capture back with the bishop here, and we after the queen moves there is nothing problem, we can just start pushing our pawns here and start creating some passer. But Mamedyarov doesn't goes for it. He plays the move h6. This is not that accurate to play on this position because now we can just capture this bishop in the situation, and after the rook captures we can just attack the rook here. After the rook comes back, we just push our e6 pawn and attacking the d5 square. If the pawn captures back, we will capture. Sorry about that. If the pawn captures, we can capture with our queen and give the check. After the king moves, we can just capture the pawn here. That is like this. So we have to protect this pawn with our knight. We can just capture here, and this is okay to play in this situation. This is a advantage for white in this situation. This is what supercomputer actually suggested in this variation. But Magnus didn't go for that. But Magnus plays an even better move than a supercomputer. That's what's something interesting about this game. He didn't go for that captures. He just want to keep his advantage here. That is exchange advantage in the situation. So he just supports his rook in the situation. And now he puts his bishop to e6 and want to trade his pair of rooks here. Magnus didn't go for the trade here. Magnus goes for queen to d1. This is some of the difficult moves to spot on this situation because, as you see, many will not go for again to the initial position of pushing our queens. The two against this b and c pawns, which is looking too dangerous here. Actually, the logic behind queen to d1 is to just to capture the rook here. Sorry about that. Queen to d1 is after something you moves like that, like before push, we can just capture here and give him this check. Or not king captures, bishop captures, and put him this. And after the queen attacks here, we can just put our queen and supports our rook. That's the logic behind going to the square d1 in the situation. But here he didn't push for. Here he actually goes for b4, but Magnus didn't go for rook captures in the situation. Instead, he actually goes for a killing move. That is not easy to spot this move, but actually Magnus spots this move. This is actually what supercomputer actually recommends the move. I give you a few seconds. You can try it on yourself. This is something difficult to spot this move. This is not a human can play this move, but Magnus spots this. That's what something interesting about Magnus here. I hope you guys found this move. That is pushing the pawn to b3 and giving this c pawn to push forward, and that's what Mamedyarov also trying for this whole time, to create the passer out of the b and c pawns. Magnus is just giving the pawn as pushing the pawn to b3 and creating the c pawn as passer. But in this game it is okay to play this because there is a sequence of moves which will be okay to play in this situation, because in the game Mamedyarov pushes the pawn to c3 and creates a passer. Here you have to attack the queen in this situation. This is something difficult to spot on this variation, because after creating the passer we just want to attack and play some series of 1 to 3 moves. That's the only move to continue this game for Magnus, and Magnus spotting each and every move in the situation. Here we have to attack the queen because we have to remove the defense of the attack of the queen on the d4 square, because our queen can't guard this pawn for the whole long time. so we have to move the queen. He can't stay in this diagonal because the squares are covered by the pawn and the rook here. The queen have to move somewhere. The queen goes to c7 and supporting the c pawn to push forward. After the knight moves, we can just start pushing our c pawn in this situation for Mamedyarov. But here there is only a winning move. So only move to continue the position here. That is, you have to spot the knight to e1 move. That is, you have to defend this square, which he can't push to c2. We will just capture in the situation. Here Mamedyarov plays the move f6. This is not that accurate to play on the situation. Before we are looking at what happened in the game, I want to show you on this line. That is, here there is no more hope of pushing the c pawn in this situation. So the queen have to move somewhere, that is like this, and try attacking our queen here. Here we can just have the plan of putting our knight and taking our knight to e4 and create some pressure on the d5 square with our bishop and the knight looking at that square. It may be a useful idea. Here we can't just attack our queen. We can even just push the bishop back by playing the move f3. It is okay to, and we can just attack the bishop, and we have to go back, and we can just start pushing our f pawn in this situation, f and g pawns, and attack the bishop in this situation. It is so much winning for white in this situation, but as you see, allows Mamedyarov to create a passer, but there is no compensation for him to create this passer into a queen in this variation. It is hard to play this position. But here Mamedyarov plays a mistake in the situation. He plays the move f6. Here Magnus shifts his plan of putting his knight to c2 to putting his knight to d3 here. And here he captures back with his knight. And here the knight captures back. And here he didn't capture the knight here. He just captured the bishop here. And threatening the knight now. Now Mamedyarov tries a last move in this situation. He tries pushing the pawn to c2 and looks for what Magnus plays. Here Magnus plays the accurate move. That is, he plays the queen to e1 and attacking the bishop, attacking the knight. And if the knight moves, he also threatening the bishop on e7, which is complicated to play on this situation. And here Mamedyarov resigns the game. And I'll show you a sample line what happens if the game continued here. Here you may think that what will happen if the knight comes to d3. It actually attacking the queen and also saving the c1 square, that is the queen square of the c pawn here. You may get a doubt what will happen in this variation. Here we can just capture the rook here, the bishop here, and continue the game. Whether he will promote the pawn, we can just capture. There is nothing too much to worry about this variation. But there's also an interesting move to play on. That is, we can also capture the pawn here, and if the queen is accepted now, we can just capture here and it gives a check. And after the king moves, we can just pick up the queen in this variation. And we will just pick up the pawn in few moves in this variation. Because it's only the knight supports the pawn, the knight is hanging with the rook. It will be an easy win for Magnus in this situation. So there is no time to capture the queen in this variation. You have to move his king here. We can now capture the bishop. After he promotes, we capture with our rook. He captures back, and we capture with our queen. He captures with the knight. And as you see, the materials are equal, but we have a 2-pawn advantage in this situation. And as you see, he didn't have any passes in this situation. That is, you don't have a b pawn or c pawn. B pawn is stopped by our own b pawn. There is nothing to worry about in the situation. And only we have a passer in this situation. That is, our d pawn is going to be a passer in this variation. So Mamedyarov knows that. So he resigns after the move queen to e1. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Keep supporting this channel. Thank you for your support. See you in the next video.